So we are here for the next hour or so to talk about how service providers can provide a role in the development of the national strategy document and what that would look like. And we really just want to have a frank conversation around how service providers can interact with the document. So just in terms of logistics, my name is Kathy Hawkins and I'm from Inclusion NL, and I'm going to facilitate the panel this afternoon. I'm going to get each person, as they start to present, to introduce themselves. We got quite an impressive panel of individuals here, and rather than me try to shag up all the work that they're doing, I'm just going to get them to introduce themselves. So we're going to start with Elizabeth from CCRW.
Hello, hi, I'm Elizabeth, and so I've been with CCRW for just over 8 years, and I've been managing employment programs for people with disabilities with CCRW since 2012. The key kind of priority areas that I've been focused on is supporting job seekers with disabilities in terms of continually improving our processes and supports, and also working with businesses that are primarily small businesses. Most of the businesses we work with have less than 100 employees. It's that 98% of businesses across Canada that Maureen mentioned earlier. That's really been my niche. And one thing it's important to say is that we're completely cross-disability, so our candidates come from a variety of backgrounds in that sense. So the first pillar that I really want to just jump into is the role the service provider can play in developing disability-confident workplaces. I really think this is an important role for service providers to play. So in the strategy, you know, it does talk about how the fear that businesses have and their lack of knowledge around accommodation and a need for practical support and advice. So that's something organizationally we've really committed to, specifically around practical advice and practical supports. I think the real opportunity here is for service providers to really come together and for us to share our best practices, to share our challenges, and share our information so that we can really move this pillar forward. So I know in the strategy, it also talks about the business case. And I'd like to just kind of unpack that a little bit, because I thought that was, it's a term that I think that as a community of service providers, we can really kind of dig into and talk about how to use it and maybe what are some of the dangers and how it might be used now. So many times when you hear the business case, or if you're a service provider, you see that you'll see stats like hiring a person with a disability will mean better attendance, higher retention rates, low instances of workplace injury. And I think that a lot of these stats and generalizations can be a little bit dangerous in the sense that it generalizes a very diverse group of people, and it doesn't put the person first. When we have the person first, it's about accommodating and making sure that we have a process in place that's going to allow them to work to their best ability. If you are working with someone with an episodic disability, you know, I know Tammy might speak to that. I'm sure she'll speak to that a little bit later. And she's done, Realize has done some really great research around the return on investment employers see when they have flexible and adaptive workplaces. So it's maybe not about attendance in the sense of punching the clock every day, but it's about making sure that you have a workplace that's going to be adaptable to these individuals. But one thing that I think is really kind of important to note on these stats is that there are businesses out there that's been their experience, right? That they have broadened their diversity, and it has meant that they have had, you know, no workplace injuries, great attendance rates. And I think what we need to do as service providers, or there's an opportunity for us to do as service providers, is to kind of take it one step further when we're talking about the business case and saying, these are businesses who have recognized that it's important to invest in their employees. They've recognized that when they make sure that they have the supports in place, when they make sure that they've made adjustments to somebody who might need to start their day a little bit later or adjust shifts, hey, that meant that there was lower in attendance rates, you know, because people were supported they had these results, or they knew that they had to really make sure that training around workplace safety was important, and hiring people with disabilities, we had inclusive hiring and inclusive training processes. So there wasn't an increased risk of injury because we really invested in that. And I think many times the conversation that we're seeing with employers is helping them feel more confident in asking employees what they need to be successful, and pulling out those best practices and opportunities for support. So I would just like, because I know that's in the strategy a lot, talking about how do we use the business case, and so I think we just need to come together and really develop how to use the business case and how to move that forward. I know one of the common adjustments too is adjustments in training. So many of the times that we see that with our employers, and then we hear back from our employers what that positive impact has made in their own community. We have one of our businesses presenting on the panel tomorrow to speak to that. Another quick anecdote, we had a candidate that we were working with in a business, and it's a bit of a long story, but the way he needed to learn was through shadowing another employee. So through a few months of kind of communication with that business, they were all on board to do that, and this person has excelled in the job. So they struggled a little bit with figuring out how this person, or for this person to really identify how and what to be doing during slow periods. So they made a visual aid. And of course, what we heard back was the whole team that we have here have benefited from this visual aid, and everybody is performing better. And I think that just kind of speaks to, and I know around the table, I'm sure there's lots of examples of times where they've shifted up how they do things, and it's resulted in a better overall performance. So it's that idea of when you invest in your people, that's going to come back to you. And I think that's the thread for the business case of why it's so important. Just quickly also, I've given the warning here, I think it's very timely that we're talking about disability confident employers because of labor market shifts and labor market disruption. You know, big shutdowns in Ontario through GM, shutdowns in Alberta. There's people with disabilities are going to be doubly impacted, and there's going to be a big need for businesses to businesses are going to have this broader tool of talent. We're going to need to look at service providers as bridging those gaps, and really working with employers and working with candidates and developing talent pipelines that might include retraining, that might include other pieces. But with globalization and the way the labor market is shifting, I think just being mindful of how and what the labor market looks like is going to be an important piece that we keep at the forefront as we're talking about the strategy. So as we shift gears a little bit away from disability confident workplaces, I just wanted to say that I'm really glad to see that comprehensive supports are a pillar, because I do think it is a pillar. I hear many times candidates coming into our offices and saying that they only want to work 3 to 6 hours depending on the province, because once they move past that threshold, of course benefits start being clawed back. So that shouldn't be a deterrent, and so having a flexible passport, I think will be so valuable. And I think just making sure that in those comprehensive supports, that we make sure that there is an access to counseling, health supports, occupational therapist supports, all the other kind of wraparound services that are going to support individuals in being their best and achieving employment. So 1 minute left. I just wanted to say I'll pass it over to my colleagues, but the opportunity to really tailor our services and really tailor our supports to both candidates and employers to broker those relationships is going to be so important, so that we can be agile, the word I heard earlier, but being agile and flexible and constantly evolving to deliver services that are going to meet both stakeholders' needs.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hi, can people hear me okay? Yeah. My name's Sean McEwen. I work at Calgary Alternative Employment Services, and of course Calgary. And I've been doing that for about 20, actually it was 20 years last month. So I was working in the field of disability services for a long time. The year before I started working at Calgary Alternative Support Services, I was working at an employment agency. And when I started working at CAS, I realized there's a lot missing. There's a lot of service gaps in terms of finding people with disabilities employment. So I was given the latitude to start an employment program, and I hired really smart people to help me look good and help me make a very good employment program that now serves somewhere between 120 and 130 people every fiscal year. So that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. We've designed employment services, supported entrepreneurship services. We've done projects with local First Nations communities, going out to their communities and helping them design employment inclusion services. I've also been past president of the Canadian Association for Supported Employment and Alberta Association for Supported Employment, and I'm very involved right now in something called the Calgary Employment First Network that I believe is a successful innovation I should talk about a little bit. As I was going through the document, I saw something that I've continued to see in my career since the mid-90s, and that is great ideas written on paper. I think there's no shortage of documents. I still remember the In Unison report, and you know, every few years there's just a landmark document about here's our way forward, these are the things that we should do. And it worries me that they don't always gain traction, and so that's something that I would like to talk about. I think this is an awesome document, but I also thought that the Alberta Employment First document was awesome too. And when was it? 2013, the province of Alberta announced an Employment First initiative, and you could see in your document that it doesn't even show up as a valid and viable initiative right now in Alberta. And the reason is because no one did anything different. If we write down great ideas and we don't do anything different, then we've just got another wonderful plan in our filing cabinet. So that's something that I would like to kind of address in terms of a strategy moving forward. It really isn't enough to develop good ideas. We spend a lot of time and efforts learning how to more effectively serve people with disabilities, and we've gotten pretty good at that. But the other half of that coin is learning how to help employers make change at work. And I think that we as service providers, one of the resources that we need is more insight, more training, more intentional learning around what makes work work, what makes work healthy, what makes it inclusive, what specifically are the things that we can help employers change in their behavior at work. Because you can go online right now, you can go to hirefortalent.ca and find everything you need as an employer to self-guide your way through inclusion. It's a fabulous website with amazing documents for service providers and employers alike, but there's not really a lot of uptake on it. What we do see is when we put good career exploration in to finding a really good talent match and providing an employer with a facilitated interview, and 6 weeks later that employer is phoning us saying, I should have done this years ago, this is one of the smartest things I've ever done, I need 6 more people like this. Like this was a really smart thing for me to have done, and it made me a better employer. I've put things in place like evaluations, like job descriptions. How many times have you placed somebody in a job and they didn't have a job description? What's your outcome there? How do you know that you've facilitated competency within that work site? So helping employers with stuff like that, with plain language, with opportunities for engagement. The things that make a workplace good are things that make a workplace good for all of us. They don't just make a workplace good for people with disabilities. But just like our organizations, employers get caught up in the day-to-day, and they don't always address the things that need to be addressed. I think it's very common for organizations in the disability services sector to not have a really good policy and protocol around workplace accommodations. How are we not getting to that? Well, obviously, we really get caught up in the day-to-day. So if we can be conscious of that, and as service providers, be helping employers to address that, I look at tools like the Guarding Minds at Work tool, which is a fabulous, fabulous free self-assessment for any employer, including nonprofit employers, to kind of assess along 13 psychosocial indicators how healthy is your workplace. And it's very interesting because the things they have in there are things like clear leadership and expectations, civility and respect, organizational culture, the things that if you're good at, people with disabilities thrive in those environments. So I really kind of look at this voluntary standard on psychological health and safety in the workplace as just an example of universal design. It's an example of something that works for everyone. And where we can leverage that, it's really important. I think it's very important for us to realize that disability is just another type of diversity, and diversity makes a group stronger. That's the point. So if we can utilize existing tools like the Guarding Minds at Work stuff, like the Hire for Talent stuff, and help employers navigate those, I think that's important. But we also need to very conscientiously and intentionally, as service providers, make our learning more robust and deeper around workplace culture, because that's the part of what we do that I think employers would be really interested in. And if we're going to do more research, maybe we should be doing research about things that employers look at the results of and think, yeah, I've got to be doing that. If we could do a before and after case on a business prior to a person with a disability being there and 1 year later, and show that things like workplace safety, employer engagement, innovation, productivity, if we could show that those things went up and apply a dollar value to it, that's research that I think employers would buy into. And those are really the places I think we need to focus. We have so much great knowledge and compassion and great hearts and strengths for serving people with disabilities, but we need to learn more about how to put good ideas into practice through embedding them in work routines. Those are the ways that I think we can help employers learn more, and ways that this strategy can be more effective. Great ideas they're like Christmas ornaments. They're just hanging there on the tree, right? I want to open a present. I think we need something to really be able to sink our teeth into. And I also think that networks, the ability to learn from each other is really critical as well. Calgary Employment First Network started almost as an accident and ended up being this entity that celebrates Disability Employment Awareness Month across the Calgary region every fall, hosts employer awards galas. We've realized it's all of these old people sitting around the table that have 25 years of experience. None of our frontline staff are gaining any experience from that. So we have started to provide training series. So veteran staff are providing sessions on career counseling or sessions on employer engagement or on job coaching, providing that to each other at no cost and just utilizing the strengths that we already have. We have the ability to be innovative and be clever. We just need time in our day to do it. And I think that's a piece that funders need to be really aware of. Make that an outcome. Make research and embedding new practices and engaging with each other and innovation, make that an outcome. That's how you embed something important in a work routine. I'm going to stop talking now because I think my minute's up. All right.
Thank you, Sean.
Okay, ditto, Sean, ditto. Thanks. So, hi everyone. I'm Jen Susi. I'm from Live, Work, Play. Unlike Sean, I have prepared notes because I can't speak as eloquently as he can off the cuff. So I'm just going to share a little bit with you about Live, Work, Play and the context of like our perspective with the draft strategy. And I just kind of worked through the 4 pillars and just our perspective on that. So Live, Work, Play, we're a charitable organization. We're located in the NCR, and our whole mandate is to help the community to welcome individuals that have intellectual disabilities. Our organization provides comprehensive, just enough support to people with intellectual disabilities. So within that definition, we look at folks that have developmental disabilities, people with autism spectrum diagnosis, and our whole role is to help our members enjoy homes of their own, healthy relationships, and to have included lives in the community. We take a similar approach in delivering employment support, supporting both the job seeker with an intellectual disability and employers to create a more diverse and inclusive workplaces that value the skills and contributions of our members. The perspective I bring to you today when looking at the draft strategy is one that is focused on this population, which tends to be even more marginalized within employment. Estimates of the overall unemployment rate of this group of people in Canada tend to be around 75%, and it's because of this that we think special attention should be paid to this group of traditionally undervalued workers. So looking at the 4 pillars, the first one, disability confident and inclusive workplaces. I think this pillar is key from the point of view of Live, Work, Play and our contribution to this discussion. The strategy mentions how many service providers work to prepare clients with disabilities to enter the labor market, but that only a few work with employers to ensure that their organizations are ready for an inclusive workforce. So from our perspective, that's right on point. There's a substantial amount of awareness needed about these 2 very different activities, providing an accommodation to a worker versus changing an entire workplace, the latter being what is generally needed to successfully include people with disabilities, in particular where intellectual disability and/or mental health are involved. In our interactions and training with employers, our organization has noticed this gap and is focused on supporting workplaces to become more welcoming and supportive of all employees, not just the one employee that may have an intellectual disability. So we were very glad to see that as part of, to see that as one of the pillars. Second, the comprehensive supports. So we feel that the suggested initiatives that the strategy focuses on are key to moving the needle in employment for people with all disabilities. In particular, the focus on revising provincial and national employment programs to be user-friendly, the emphasis on youth with disabilities and supportive transitions from employment, or from school to employment, and ensuring that income support is sufficient to keep people out of poverty. Service providers, we're going to need increased financial support to build capacity in these different areas, and we'll need to communicate with others and with each other in a collaborative and appreciative way moving forward. And I think that's really key, right? There's lots of different service providers across Canada, national, provincial, municipal. We need to work together as a team to get this done, really. So the third pillar, effective partnerships. So I'm really glad that this has been established as one of the pillars within the strategy, and I wanted to highlight an innovative project that we've been working on at Live, Work, Play. So it's really a partnership between Live, Work, Play and the federal government of Canada as an employer. And so since 2014, Live, Work, Play has been sharing the value of hiring employees with intellectual disabilities to the federal government and in a grassroots way throughout various government departments. Fast forward, it's March 2018, and working in partnership with the Treasury Board Secretariat and the Public Service Commission, a joint challenge was issued. So it was issued to all the departments across Canada and all the agencies, and it was basically letting them know the value of hiring people with intellectual disabilities, and it challenged all government departments to hire employees with intellectual disabilities. Up to 100 was the number that was put on it in March. So to date, through this initiative, Live, Work, Play, and some of our partner agencies that we've been working with, we've managed to help the federal government welcome 63 employees with intellectual disabilities as employees. So yeah, that's pretty cool. It's been very cool. So partnerships work, and not just our partnership with the federal government as an employer, but us working with other service providers across Canada to make this happen. So finally, the pillar around measurement and accountability. So I think really Mary Gazella in the audience today made a really good point around the data and being able to find out more information with the data. So we really need to dig deep, and there needs to be a way to tunnel down a bit within disability. So we need to find ways to track disability and gains in employment globally, but also more specifically within disability types, so we can figure out what works, what is working, what's not working, what works for whom, so that we can really have accurate number and information. And then, as to Sean's point, hopefully that's where the money is going to flow, and more focus can then maybe be spent on giving extra support if necessary to those who maybe are moving along an employment pathway a little bit more slowly or in a way that's not really working. So that's all I really have to say. That's all I prepared. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And you were very eloquent, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tammy Yates, and I'm the Executive Director of Realize. And unlike Jen, like Jen, but unlike Jen, I also prepared written notes, but it's because I'm from the Caribbean, and we are storytellers, so I can actually sit here and tell you the story of this whole day. So I'm actually reining myself in by preparing these notes. So it's quite interesting for me sitting here on this very high esteemed panel in terms of service provision, because as I begin to share a bit more about Realize and who we are, we're a different type of service provider. So, I'll come to that a little further. But following, I don't know how many of you were actually at the session yesterday that was put on by Avian, which was formerly the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies and Arch Disability Law. There was a session yesterday on intersectionality and human rights, monitoring change together. So I will be approaching this discussion from a holistic lens, and that's because of all the hats that I wear. Now, you may look at my hair and say, what hat can go on this hair? But believe me, I've made hats of my own. So the first hat that I wear is as the Executive Director of Realize. And Realize really hosts the National Civil Society Secretariat of the Episodic Disabilities Forum in Canada. What is episodic disabilities? We'll get to that. So we often refer to the Episodic Disabilities Forum as the EDF. So if you hear me referring to the EDF, that's what I'm referring to. The other hat that I wear, as the organization, is as an organization that works closely with employers. And this is where we're the different type of service provider at the table. Because a lot of my colleagues here, the service provision that's done is really with the community in terms of placing individuals in jobs and coaching and mentoring and so on, as well as working with employers. So we train employers, we build employer capacity with people living with episodic disabilities. So we don't place people living with episodic disabilities or do job coaching and so on. So that's just a bit of the difference. We also work on changing policy and practice to ensure full inclusion of people living with episodic disabilities. And again, the other hat that we wear is as an organization that works closely with all levels of government on changing policy to ensure full inclusion of people living with episodic disabilities. We're also an organization that works closely with the LGBTQ2S+ community. And as a woman, and as a Black woman, and as a fairly recent immigrant to Canada, and fairly recent is 7 years now, but for many others who may have moved long prior to me, for me it's still fairly recent. Intersectionality, I think, is critical in this discussion that we have today. And just to ensure that we're all on the same page in terms of intersectionality, intersectionality is a framework designed to explore the dynamics between coexisting identities. So gender identity, living with a disability, race, age, language, background, etc. And these connected systems of oppression. The term was created by a Black feminist writer, Kimberly Crenshaw, and it challenged women because we're not a homogenous group. And the reason that I share this in this setting is that I am actually thrilled to see in this strategy that intersectionality is actually pulled out as a section of its own. So in the draft strategy, people living with disabilities are not identified as a homogeneous group. And as such, the recognition that equitable recruitment to the workforce, retention in employment, and returning to the workplace may require different strategies for different groups of people living with disabilities. Don't get me wrong. That does not mean that there aren't overarching areas of commonality. However, we also need to focus when the action plan and initiatives, targets, and so on, outcomes are identified on, for example, women living with disabilities, on indigenous communities living with disabilities, rural communities, and the list goes on. The indigenous elder this morning spoke about, I actually wrote it here, some things cannot be sugar-coated. I don't know if you remember him saying that. So I am putting it to everyone today that in this strategy, the initiatives coming out of this strategy and the action plan and the monitoring of this strategy, we cannot sugarcoat the fact that everyone living with a disability needs to be addressed in the same way. So on the latter point, I'm also delighted to see that episodic disabilities and intermittent work capacity have been clearly articulated on page 14. I actually wrote and circled the page number on page 14 of the draft. I have noted, however, that when I did a word search, and I think one of the panelists who connected to us virtually mentioned this, and well, many of you who would have been sitting behind me would have seen my head going like this, because there is no working definition of disability in the document. So anyone picking up this document, and if we're saying we're moving together, we're moving forward together, we have to move forward together with a common understanding. Singing from the same song sheet is what I tend to tell my team. We may sing different notes. Sometimes some of us may sing off key. I sing in a choir. That does not mean that I can sing, but I sing anyway. So we will be singing from the same song sheet, but we have to have a common definition by which we'll be singing that song. So in Bill C-81, the definition that's being used, and I would suggest that perhaps we use this definition for this strategy, is that a disability means a physical, mental, intellectual, learning, communication, or sensory impairment or functional limitation, whether permanent, temporary, or episodic in nature, that in interaction with a barrier hinders a person's full and equal participation in society. So that's just contextual, a little bit more about Realize. So Realize is commemorating its 20th anniversary this year, and we have been working on the issue of episodic disabilities for almost that length of time. So organizations like Disabled Women's Network Canada, the MS Society, Arthritis Society were really some of the earliest cross-disability collaborators with us on episodic disabilities. And in considering the role that we would play in advancing this strategy, it would be pretty much the role that we're currently playing, which I like to call the 4x4. And that is sort of the four things that we do: research, education, policy change and practice change. And research, as the Secretariat of the EDF, we conduct and work in collaboration with academic as well as other community-based researchers to really identify the gaps and then provide the evidence. And in terms of practice change and policy change, we work with HR professionals across the country with in-person training and online training on episodic disabilities. Okay, just one more thing. So in terms of supports, data, stable funding, and what is actually, I think, critical, and I know everybody's saying this, but we cannot overemphasize it. This cannot just be our strategy. It has to be embedded within the federal government and then reportable by each jurisdictional level of government, because 20 years down the line, our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren are going to be sitting here and saying these same things. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Bonjour. So this is a little bit of a hard act to follow, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And first of all, I work for an organization called L'Image. We're a support and employment service for people with living with mental illness in Montreal, Montreal. I've been there for 35 years, so I feel like pretty old here at this table, but that's okay. That means I got to see things. Like when we first started, we had to convince psychiatrists that their patients were able to work. And then we had to go through the whole process of convincing people that they were able to go to work. And then we had to convince employers that these people were a solution to their employment problems. And right now we're trying to convince the government that if they don't change their rules, they are the major obstacles for the people coming to see us to go back to work. So that's, I think, is the next step. Look, we help, over 400 people get back into the workforce every year. We have another 125 people that we accompany in different training programs to get them ready to go to work, either to get their skills up to level or to get other things, because we have to reorient because they're not able to do what they were doing before. And we also got another program where we do long-term support with employers and employees, and that's about like another 300 people. So it's a lot of volume, it's a lot of people, and what's sad about it all is that it doesn't even touch 10% of the population of people living with disabilities in Quebec. So for us, this is a problem in itself. We don't understand why in a period of, we have a manpower shortage, the employment rate for people with disabilities remains 30% or more below the employment rate of people without disabilities. It makes no sense. In the document, in the Aspiring Workforce, I wrote it down because I thought it was great, right? The Mental Health Commission of Canada states that most people with mental illness have skills and expertise to offer the labor market. They can and want to work. So why aren't they working? What's going on? We have a strategy coming. I could tell you now, when I first read it, it looked a lot like the strategy that we had in Quebec 10 years ago. The result of the strategy, the objective of the strategy 10 years ago was to cut by half the differential between employment rates between people with disabilities and people without disabilities. Fact of the matter is that depending on whose stats you look at, it actually got worse. But there was accountability, which was a great thing. I agree with you, Sean. A lot of good ideas. But, you know, there's a lot of committees. And so a lot of these committees were places where good ideas went to die. So now we need some action. What am I looking forward to in this strategy? First of all, let's not make the same mistakes. And if you're not able to do innovation, well, then it's status quo. Right now, status quo was an employment rate of under 30%. I know I come back to that often, but it sickens me that in 2018, there's no difference from 2008. And when I first started, I mean, at least when I first started, they were starting to take the Gates around the hospitals away, and they were becoming institutions instead of asylums. And I could say, well, you know, this is a good thing, because now we're having people going into the community. And then it was, okay, they're in the community, let's get them work. And we get them work. To be honest with you, the majority of the people that come to see us have medical certificates saying they're unable to work. You know what you have to do to get them a job? You have to go talk to employers. You have to talk to and network with mental health professionals. You have to network with everybody. My biggest problem right now in our organization is that we have too many job offers and not enough people coming in. We have to mobilize. We have to have people get off welfare. Right now, the welfare laws in Quebec anyway are a major obstacle. When we talk to people, every single time I make a presentation, 4 to 5 questions are, what's going to happen to my benefits? What's going to happen to my check? What happens if it doesn't work? What's crazy about it, in Quebec, the welfare laws make it that these people don't lose their benefits. You could actually keep your Medicare card for 4 years while you're working if you had that the disability status before starting. So it's like, I was sitting at a committee once, and there were supposed to be all these experts. And what was amazing about this committee is that most of them didn't know the welfare laws, but they were the ones that were giving information to people who were looking for work. So they were misinformed, and they were misinforming. It makes no sense that professionals aren't able to give the right information to the people coming to them to see for services. It's our responsibility. Now we're going to have a strategy, and I hope the strategy really works. I think it's a great idea that we get ourselves together. I think that there's got to be some type of cohesion between provincial and federal programs. The biggest problem we have with the one that happened in Quebec, we have no stats. There's not enough money invested in research. Everything we get, well, actually, most of the stuff we're citing to sort of get more financing is American. Americans work in a way, and great for them, but in Canada we work differently. I'm going to talk about something now because I'm running out of time. I have to take notes for this, all right? I'm sorry. This year, the Mental Health Commission of Canada and the Canadian Association of Sport and Employment developed a national committee of practice. And this committee of practice, it's supported dialogue, support employment in order to advance best practices. What we want to do is eliminate employment barriers for people living with mental health challenges and illness, all right? We have 3 subcommittees, one on awareness and education, one on policy, one on practice. We have a common agenda. We're different people from representing different organizations from different provinces in Canada. We have different points of views. We have different experience. We have a common goal. And what's funny is I had this whole speech, but I put it aside because my colleagues here basically were saying the same things as I wanted to say. And I was like, we don't even know each other. And we're all saying the same thing. And I'm basically thinking, and that's what I said when I sat down, I think we're going to be preaching to the converted here. But the fact of the matter is, we have to go convert people. And what I'm telling you is that employers aren't the problem for us anyway. Our biggest problem is mobilizing people. It makes no sense. Anyway, in Quebec, less than 10% of the people with disabilities actually go ask for services to help them get work. I think that if this program does one thing, if this strategy could have it, that we could offer the right service to the right person, no matter what, without this, depending on what's his revenue, what's his diagnosis, what's his age, what's his sex, and whatever. If we could manage that to make sure that everybody that needs a service gets the right one, I think we finally did something right. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arif Jetha, and I'm an associate scientist at the Institute for Work and Health in Toronto, Ontario, and I'm also an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. And so I'm going to be providing a compliment to some of my colleagues on the panel with regards to the role of service providers and what the literature and research is saying. Just to give you a background, I actually study the labor market transition of young adults with disabling health conditions and the experiences of entering the labor market as well as advancing through the labor market. So this is an area that is of significant interest to me. Some of my colleagues talked about the requirement for high quality data, and I would definitely agree as a researcher, that's my wheelhouse. But as you can imagine, or as you may know, researchers struggle with gaining access to research funds, especially in the area of work and health. And partly because we kind of fit between multiple funding categories within the government of Canada. Are we a health research topic? Or do we fall within the humanities and social sciences? Sometimes we get rejected from both. So it is a challenge. And then when we do find a right fit for us, the success rate for grants is under 12%. And these are thousands of Canadian researchers who are applying for competitive funds. So that provides a bit of a context with regards to why some of the high quality data doesn't exist. But in venues such as these, where we have policymakers and individuals who provide funding for research in one room, I think these types of discussions can make a significant difference in terms of highlighting the importance of these topics as both a public health issue, which is my area of work, but as well as a socioeconomic issue of significant importance to the labor market and Canadians as a whole. So when I was asked to speak on this panel, service providers play a significant role in the labor market activity of people with disabilities. And in particular, they're at the forefront on the ground, placing people with disabilities within work. And so what we know in the literature is obviously people with disabling health conditions are less likely to be employed. But it's not just about being employed. This is not just a binary variable. What we know is also about the quality of employment. So what we hear consistently in the literature is that people living with different disabling health conditions are more likely to report underemployment, productivity loss. They're more likely to be passed over for promotions. They have difficulties requesting support at work and communicating the various aspects of their disabling health condition that might impact work, as well as highlighting some of the positive impacts that they can make within the labor market. When we hear from people with disabling health conditions, they often downplay the role of their health as being a significant barrier to employment. What it's really about is the psychosocial and physical aspects of the workplace. And this is where service providers can make a significant difference in terms of addressing these physical and psychosocial workplace barriers. And so just to give you an example of this, recently we conducted a systematic review of literature. So this is a very comprehensive review of the literature where we look at what the data suggests and then we appraise it. How high of quality is that data? And the goal through this process is to make recommendations. And so what we found is when we scanned the literature with regards to work-focused policies, programs, interventions, anything that focused on young people in particular entering the labor market, what we found was that there was high quality of evidence only for one intervention, and that was supported employment interventions that are offered through service providers like those who are on this panel. And what we found was that this supported employment intervention can really benefit young people in terms of entering and advancing within the labor market. So really it comes down to this multidimensional aspect in terms of addressing health needs as well as workplace needs that people with disabilities may require. But I think what really comes out in the literature is this absence of policy-level interventions to complement the service providers' initiatives. And I think my colleague Joseph really articulated this quite nicely, that when there is incentive or when there's a disincentive to work, people won't work. But when the government offers waivers to loss of social support, that can make a world of difference in terms of someone wanting and desiring to stay in the labor market. So really, I think it's not just the service providers who should be the ones taking the lead. It should be a combined intervention with both service providers, policymakers, and healthcare providers. And another kind of key aspect that the literature suggests is the role of service providers in changing the work environment. So I'm just going to highlight a couple points here. So we know that the labor market is changing. So we're seeing a greater number of gig jobs. We're seeing a decline in manufacturing jobs. We're seeing more jobs being automated. And the result of these labor market trends is that work is becoming more precarious. And when we know that work is precarious, the people living in more vulnerable situations are more likely to be affected, and that includes people with disabling health conditions. And what we also hear when we talk to people with disabling conditions about their needs within the workplace is that obviously extended health benefits plays a huge role in terms of what they need in terms of health benefits and support within the workplace. But when we often ask about whether or not people with disabilities need more costly, hard accommodations like technology or changes to the work environment versus less costly but more challenging to implement soft accommodations like more supportive workplaces, opportunities to self-manage and take breaks within their workspace. We often hear that these soft accommodations are more needed than the hard ones, the more expensive ones. And that's an important kind of message that we can share with employers. But I think where service providers are well suited based on the literature is to address these soft accommodations, to build up the work environment so that it can truly foster employment of people with disabling health conditions. And just finally, I think I want to get back to the role of research in developing high quality data to benefit this area of promoting the labor market activity of people with disabling health conditions. And I want to highlight the importance of integrated knowledge transfer and exchange. And I'm not sure if anyone in this room is aware of what integrated knowledge transfer and exchange is. So it's producing research where knowledge users are key players at all phases of the research process. So this includes and when I talk about knowledge users, I'm talking about people with disabilities, I'm talking about policymakers, I'm talking about healthcare providers, I'm talking about employers. And at the Institute for Work and Health, this is ingrained in our research process. So we often have knowledge users involved in helping us identify research questions of relevance, producing the methods, as well as helping us interpret the results from our research. And the goal through this process is to create knowledge which will be highly utilized and relevant. So I think through this integrated knowledge transfer and exchange approach, we can truly create data that is most relevant to our needs as service providers, researchers, and policymakers. And I think this process of redeveloping this mission statement that CRWDP has initiated and bringing us all together in this discourse is an example of an integrated knowledge transfer and exchange approach, because think about it, we're all contributing to this document right now, and ideally this document will then inform both research and practice that emerges from it. And through that approach, the research that we do produce will ultimately result in a high impact in terms of helping people with disabling health conditions enter the labor market, as well as advance and be productive workers. And so I'm going to leave it at that, but I'm happy to address more questions if you have them.
Great presentations. Do we have any questions from anybody in the room? Any takers on questions? I have a bunch of questions, but I certainly wanted it open to the floor first. Question down the back. Okay, I'm going to need to perhaps get a mic runner. Awesome. Thanks, Deb.
Hi, my name is Kim.
Hi, Kim.
I'm from Ontario. My husband is a disabled worker. I also work with intellectually challenged individuals. I guess my question is, I would like to know what type of jobs are the most common that you're finding people are being able to enter? What kind of employers are more open to hiring people with disabilities? And are you finding it's a specific type of employment? Is it a wide range of employment? Thank you.
Thanks. Somebody like to answer that? Sure. Sure.
Actually, there's not really a type of employment. We work anyway with what are the person's interests and what is he able to do, and then we go look for that job. And so there's not like a prototypical type of job or entry job, or not even a prototypical type of employer. I can tell you who we have a lot of difficulty with, though. We have a lot of difficulty with companies that have diversity programs, because they have a tendency to lean more towards diversity programs. When you see them, it's really interesting because they exclude people with disabilities instead of having like, they're there for inclusion, but they actually exclude people. But small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, really easy. They're really open. Basically, what they're asking us is very simple. Look, I need a worker. Do you have a worker who could come and do the work that needs to be done? We present workers. Yes, they have mental health issues, but they are workers before all. They're responsible, they show up, they do what they have to do, they gripe about taxes, they're not happy that they don't have enough vacations, but that's good, that's normal. What we don't have is employers who are like, well, I'd like to hire someone with a disability because it'll look good. We don't have many of those people knocking on our doors. So I don't know if that answers your question, but in the end, there are a lot of employers, especially small and business. You know what's the funniest? I work in mental health, right? I have a lot of trouble with getting people into government jobs. I have a lot of trouble getting them to diversity jobs. I get a lot of trouble getting them hired by people that work with disabilities because there seems to be a prejudice. So it's like, I think small business is the way to go. That's who we network with the most, and that's where we have our best results.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. I have one person right here with a question, and another one right here, and I'm going to interject with a question, and then we'll keep going. What role can this group play in the success of the strategy? How can a group of service providers help support the success of the strategy that we're trying to work towards?
Speaking from my perspective, being involved in different national and regional networks and associations, there's a lot of untapped potential there. And I think probably lots of people have been involved in committees or associations or networks that for one reason or another didn't work. And I think what's really important here is that concept of failing forward. Before we just repeat the same failures again and again, maybe look at why didn't it work last time. There's opportunity here to collaborate and learn from each other. But again, this whole idea, the danger of ideas. Ideas are my favorite thing, but if you don't do something meaningful with them, it just kind of becomes discouraging. You end up on this treadmill of generating great ideas that don't go anywhere. So the idea of an intentional network, a community of practice, that type of thing, I think that's the beginning of this, right? The idea is the beginning. It's the first step. It's the looking at ways that you put that idea into practice. So that I think would be a significant role. And even agreeing on what kinds of things will we measure? What about the other things within this strategy? Something really cool the Calgary Employment First Network did with each other is we had a really early sort of catastrophic failure with job placement that I won't go into. But suffice to say, we looked at it and thought, how do we make sure this never happens again? And it got really easy for a group of 10 different service providers around a table to say, let's develop employer engagement standards. If we give leads to each other, this is the level of service. These are the specific promises we will make to each other and to the employers that we serve together. So even opportunities like that, to be able to look at what's the right way and wrong way to do this. Let's agree to never do the wrong way and only do the right way. Right? Those kinds of opportunities for information sharing and then putting things into practice.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Question from the floor.
I know that Joseph in particular touched on this already, but my question is about how much of a barrier do you see misinformation about government programs, and particularly what will happen to you if you leave the program for employment, the ease of getting back on, and also just misinformation about the interaction between various government programs as a barrier, and also within your organizations, what sort of training is there for the employees of your organization so that they're knowledgeable about the wide variety of programs out there and how they interact with each other?
Thank you. Someone like to take that one? Joseph? Sure.
I could maybe
Sure.
elaborate on that.
Sure. Please do.
It's twofold. Let's start with organizations like Supported Employment Services. Usually we have structures to make sure that our employees are not only well-informed, well-trained, and able to do their jobs with the professional standards that they have to in order to answer to the needs and the requests that are being put upon them, all right? That would be the first part. And now I'm going to say the ugly part, which would be the second part. I don't know elsewhere, but I could talk about Quebec now. Sport employment services in general are in competition one with each other because the budgets that are available are not, they don't grow every year. And so basically, in order for someone to get a little bit more money, it's because they're taking it off somebody else. And what happens when you're in a situation where there's a manpower shortage? Manpower shortage means there's also less people looking for work. And organizations are now becoming experts, are claiming to be experts to work with people with disabilities simply because that's the clientele that's available. Now, the danger there is that they're the ones often that aren't really trained to do what they're supposed to be doing. And what you have is you have misinformation. You have people being referred to the wrong jobs, or you have people that are just being discouraged because their names have been taken down and then there's no follow-up and there's no service. I think that is one of the things we're seeing a lot of in Quebec is all of a sudden all these people that are looking for work are actually being categorized by certain professionals as having unidentified or undiagnosed mental health problems. Now, what the hell is that? And who the hell decides? You know, I mean, seriously, if someone has told a story to 6 different people since he walked into the organization, and maybe he's a little frustrated at the end because he still hasn't gotten the job, does that make him have a mental health problem, or is it just because he's not getting answers to his questions, right? So it's sort of like a catch-all, and I find it's dangerous because people are turning to the clientele not because they're able to work with them, but because it's a question of survival of the organization. And that I would add is causing a problem that matches the misinformation.
Thank you, Joseph. Go ahead.
That's a perfect segue to what I was going to ask. I am a researcher also, and so I've done a lot of work in Ontario talking to people with various disabilities about their experiences looking for work. And some of what I heard was that service providers are in the way. That they are kind of place themselves as intermediaries for much of the reasons that you spoke about. People themselves looking for work, trying to find other people work. And a lot of criticisms and disappointments among those communities. So I was just wondering, from your perspectives, how do you respond to people who think that service providers are kind of place themselves in the middle between people, job seekers with disabilities and employers?
Good question.
Absolutely, we do hear criticism sometimes, and we have people coming through our doors who've been to every other agency already in the block 10 times. And I would say probably the most common criticism that we hear is I've got, though my experience is 10 years old, I've got this professional experience, and I was told that I have to put on work boots and scrub the bathroom floor, and that was the only job that I was going to have available to them. And I do think that happens, that there's that pressure or the landscape that's out there that a lot of agencies are, or there are agencies out there who are pushing people towards opportunities that aren't meaningful and don't allow them to excel based on their skill sets, which is why that skills-based approach, like you were talking about, Jeffrey, and I think we're all kind of nodding our head, is so important when we're making matches. And I just wanted to say, ideally, if we achieve our goal in this strategy, that there won't be a need for service providers. Ideally, we should be able to be creating a landscape where we don't have to broker relationships. I think if you do it well, it can be a good service, but I can see that there is some, in some cases, where agencies can be that roadblock. So if we need to put some teeth behind this, and I agree with Sean also in terms of coming together and agreeing on standards between us about how we're going to deliver service so that everyone knows what to expect, can help to reduce that. And if we move through all of kind of the areas in this strategy, like I said, hopefully we'll make ourselves redundant.
Can I add to that?
Yeah,
So
sure.
the data indicates that not just for people with disabilities, but for all Canadians, especially young Canadians, the availability of full-time permanent jobs that meets people's educational and career interests are declining at a rapid rate. Jobs are more likely to be part-time, short-term contracts. And that in itself, that trend in the labor market is creating issues for all people. So I think that's one thing that we need to consider, that this is also an effect of the labor market and the changes. And obviously, vulnerable populations are going to be affected first and most significantly. But I think the other issue that we might want to think about is the outcome measure that service providers are measuring the success of their services. So one thing that we've seen in the literature quite a bit is this concept of competitive employment outcomes. So it's not just about being employed in any job, it's about being employed in a job that is paid at the wages of others in comparable jobs and fits someone's career interests and skill sets. So if that is the outcome measure that we're using and the service providers are also using, then maybe we might be able to overcome this situation where someone's feeling placed in a job that doesn't meet their skills.
I wouldn't mind chiming in on this one too, because
Sure.
I do a lot of training with service providers around Western Canada in particular, and just looking at, and this is with particular reference to people with intellectual disabilities, and looking at service brand, and when we really kind of dive deep into that and look at who do employers think we are as a brand? Because it's very, very common. Anyone in this room who's gone to talk to an employer about a talent match for someone that they're representing has probably heard the words, "Oh, we've worked with you people before and it didn't work." But you know that they don't know who you are, right? So what does that, I think what that says is there is a brand, and that brand can simply be defined as a story in the mind of the market. And under that, I think sometimes the service provider brand is you people helping those people. That we get that a lot, right? And so then when you hear negative stories about service providers, what I kind of want to get into is why is there that brand? Why is it the you people helping those people? And then the gentleman who asked service providers who have barriers within their own systems, and how do you know if they have competencies? I think that a lot of the time when we're serving people with disabilities, we have people that come from a disability service background, with the exception of some of the vocational rehabilitation kinds of services. We don't actually have people who are paying attention to career development standards and guidelines. We don't have people that are actually looking at those core competencies and developing those core competencies. We've kind of created this parallel world for people with disabilities where they don't get the same quality of service that you or I would if we were looking for a career counselor. So those kinds of things need to be addressed, and I think it's only through conversations like this and the ones hopefully coming up in this strategy that will allow that to be corrected.
Great, thank you, everybody. We have time for one more question from the floor.
I'm Linda Simpson. I'm with Performance Plus Rehabilitative Care. And I just wanted to sort of build on your comment, Jen, about the fact that we're going to need increased funding to deal with some of these complex cases. And I guess for the researchers sitting around the table, just wondering, are we tracking costs that are related to disability types? Because maybe I'm spending $7,000 on a file, and then that file gets passed on to someone else, and they're spending another $7,000. And at the end of the day, what are we looking at in terms of outcome? And what is, what are maybe looking at the best practice models as well. But I think that that's one thing perhaps that our, neighbors in the South do a little bit better than we do. And I'm just wondering if we could incorporate that into the strategy so we could evaluate the effectiveness of our services. Because what our funders are often saying to us is we're getting no return on our investment in the province of Ontario, for example, with the Ontario Disability Support Program. So, it's a known fact, they have the stats to support it, but how can we make a difference? So that's my question.
Thanks. Someone like to respond?
Can I
Yeah, go for
just
it.
very quick, sorry, I'm not trying to hog this
No, go for it.
conversation. It is dismaying to me that we have funders, particularly in the realm of intellectual disability in Alberta, that when we do such a good job with somebody that they no longer need our supports, that's not measured as an outcome. If I do such a good job finding somebody the best job they could possibly have, the employer loves them, they're both phoning me saying, stay out of our lives, we got this, you know, I'll put on a frowny face, but I'm gonna high five everyone in the office and say, yay, we got fired. You know, this person's so independent, they don't need us anymore. That's a victory, and it's the only thing the funder doesn't measure in our province. We have to start looking at what is an actual outcome, not a bureaucratic tick mark, but an actual outcome for a human being in terms of not needing paid supports anymore. I was talking to my colleague Sahana last night, and I said, I think our job needs to be reinvented so that we're constantly conscious of the fact it's not our job to support people with disabilities, it's our job to create advocates in the community who will do that forever.
And just from the perspective of the researcher, I think there's huge importance of collaborative relationships between researchers and practitioners in order to address these specific research questions, to identify the outcome measures of interest, and to be able to develop a business case, an academic case, and a practitioner's case for interventions that service providers offer.
Great, thank you, everybody, and thank you to everybody. So we are at 2:30, and we're at our coffee break for the afternoon. I wanted to...
Could I just say one thing?
Oh, sure, yes, absolutely.
The Community of Practice has prepared a one-pager giving a little overview of what we want to do and how we're doing it. They're available here if you'd like.
Okay.
That's all I have to say. To do some.
Great,
After
we'll get
this,
those
I'll put this in.
distributed, for sure. So thank you, everybody, for participating, and thank you to all our panelists. Really appreciate it.